I am super excited to get started now that I have a better camera, a better lot of things now. I'm hoping this comes out in better quality. And let's just get into this first topic. So the other day, I was on a plane and watched a movie I had been very excited to see. Critics have been calling it one of the best movies of this year. Now, I'm not going to name what movie that was because if you read the title, this video is about the most overrated movies, in my opinion. So what I did was I took the Letterboxd average rating for a movie and my rating for a movie and found the films that had the greatest difference where the Letterboxd rating was higher than my rating. I'm going to go through the top 5, but real quick, here are 5 films that just missed the cut for what I consider to be the 5 most overrated films on Letterboxd. So 10th, I had Swiss Army Man as my 10th most overrated film on Letterboxd. I gave it a 1.5, meanwhile the average rating was a 3.7. Now, I love the 2 leads in this film, Daniel Radcliffe and Paul Dano, and I am not gonna lie, I enjoy some of the goofy, crass humor. Him riding a farting corpse as a motorboat through the ocean was hysterical, but I did not click with the themes of the movie because the lead character is such a creep. I understand the film's supposed to be about longing and loneliness, but having your character be someone who unabashedly takes pictures of strangers in public and swoons over them and stalks them and knows where they live, it's really hard to get behind a film where that is your lead character. Now, Daniel Radcliffe is amazing in this film, playing an undead man trying to understand what living is. I thought he was great, but besides that, there is not a lot to cling on other than a couple fart jokes in this film. So actually, there are 2 other films tied with that one, I guess meaning they're all tied for 8th, and the next one is a short film called My Year of Dicks. It was nominated for an Oscar this past Oscar season. The average rating was a 3.7, but I gave it a 1.5. I thought this was some of the ugliest animation I've ever seen. It was impossible to take this 15 to 20 minute project seriously because everything looked gross and uncomfortable to the touch. It was this rough, kind of half comic booky. It was trying to have that textured motion, but absolutely failed on every single level. It was only about 17 minutes long, and I could not stand a single second of it. The plot is okay, but extremely predictable. I get what they were going for with this being a coming-of-age story, but it had little impact on me, and that's a genre that normally does have a big impact on me. And lastly, in this 3-way tie for 8th most overrated movie on Letterboxd, in my opinion, is A Nightmare on Elm Street. I also gave this a 1.5, and the average rating for this film is a 3.7, yet again, meaning there is a 2.2 star difference between me and the rest of Letterboxd. Now, I think the concept of a monster who can invade your dreams is amazing, but I think this story is executed poorly. I don't think the kills are that interesting, and I don't think they knew where they were going with Krueger as a villain. The dream plot twist at the end felt very tacked on and made everything we saw our lead character go through feel inconsequential by the end, and it overall failed to make me feel invested in the characters. I thought the lead was strong, played by Heather Langenkamp, but other than that, there were just so many moments, so many kills that would have hit harder in a better written and honestly scarier horror movie. Speaking of horror movies, next up at 7 I had The Witch, or The Vavitch. I thought The Vavitch was one of the most boring movies I've ever seen. Next to nothing happens in this movie. It's a lot of characters talking and discussing things that briefly happened on screen and I would have loved to see more of. I would have liked to follow the baby more, follow the trauma, but instead you just get these colonial people arguing over a silver cup. That's it. And then at the end she becomes a witch because her family stinks, which, great. So again, I rated this movie 1.5 stars, but the Letterboxd community believes this is a 3.8 star film, which blows my mind that this movie is as highly reviewed as it is. But at least it gave us Anya Taylor-Joy, who has much better films under her resume since this film. Lastly is Untitled, a movie that kind of explores the pretentious nature of the art world, but in and of itself makes a pretentious film that is a absolute snooze fest and thinks it's saying way more than it is. It is an attempt to critique art culture while also being part of that toxic art culture, and in the meantime, boring me to death. I thought it was painfully unfunny. The parts that they're trying to make these funny satirical moments get little more than a, yeah, people are like that sometimes. It has very little to say of substance beyond the art community being stupid, and I have seen better movies do that. Recently, Rye Lane does it to an absurd extent in some of its films, a movie which I adored, and in those brief scenes, I'd say about 5 minutes total, in which it touches on the topic, it does more than this film does in its entire runtime. Untitled is a movie I gave 1 star, but has an average rating of 3.3 on Letterboxd, with a difference of 2.3 stars between us. Now for the top 5. Starting with a movie that is one of the only 4 or 5 films I've ever given a half star. The lowest rating you can give on Letterboxd is Skinamarink. Now for perspective, this movie is in my mind equal to films like Thor: The Dark World and Garfield. I absolutely hated Skinamarink. I thought it was going to play on this new internet era of horror where it's a lot less what you see and more what you imagine being there. But this film takes it to an absurd extent. You can barely see what's happening because of the lighting. It is pitch black, and at 1 or 2 points I could see why people could interpret that as scary. But those are sparsely found throughout the film, since the 1 or 2 moments where horror does start to maybe build up, they hit you with this random loud noise that jumps you out of your seat and feels like the cheapest jump scare I've had in a horror film. As for plot, there is none. Maybe it's a demon, maybe it's something, maybe it's our childhood horrors and deepest fears coming back to haunt us. Whatever mileage you get out of this movie isn't because of the movie or the creative team behind it, it's because of your imagination. So if you think that this is some dark, horrifying masterpiece, maybe you should make a movie of your own. Now for a film that I sincerely cannot get why people like. Elvis. A film that took home multiple Oscar awards and many nominations. Austin Butler won awards for his performance, which, cool, he can do the Elvis voice. But beyond that, this film is a nightmare. I gave it 1 star, but the Letterboxd community has a favorable rating of 3.4, leaving 2.4 stars between me and the average Letterboxd user. This movie was near unwatchable. First off, narration is one of my least favorite things in film. Narration does a lot in books, and it has an important aspect in them. But in film, it doesn't have much of a place, unless you're using it in a unique way, or giving us insight into a character that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten. You shouldn't use narration. And the number of times we have the Colonel, played by Tom Hanks, just spouting information that we get from him through his actions is mind-boggling. We get, through seeing his actions, he doesn't take responsibility for Elvis's downfall. We can see that he's manipulating him and doesn't see, even in his heart of hearts, or doesn't care what happens to him. We don't need lengthy scenes of narration. Visually, this movie is what would happen if someone got the visual effects on Adobe and thought they were cooking. Like, just starts clicking every single button. This 12-year-old, graphic design is my passion. That's what this movie looked like visually. You do not get a single break from these agonizing colors. I get it's supposed to be the glitz and glamour of show business. I guess that's the point, but it doesn't feel like it's used intentionally enough. Finally, Jesus Christ, they made the death of Martin Luther King about Elvis. That was the point about an hour and a half into this 3-hour film where I tapped out. I don't even remember if I finished it because I gave up. And that's not something I do with many films. Every other film in this top 10, despite me not liking it, I stopped with Elvis. I could not keep with it. It is insane that Martin Luther King dies and we spend 5 minutes about the emotional effect it has on Elvis. And it's all about him. Why even include that in the film? If not to do this horrible attempt at erasing the truth of history, the truth that he used music that came from black communities and broke through because he was white, manipulating culture and taking advantage of those artists' music to become famous. Instead, we get this sob story about how much he feels for African Americans. It felt disgusting, it felt like revisionist history at its worst, and made me turn off this film. Elvis, even without that, is a film that did not deserve nearly any of the praise it got, and it genuinely makes me kinda angry, if it's not clear enough by my tone. Elvis is a 1-star film at best. Now, at the third most overrated film on Letterboxd, in my opinion, comes the film that inspired me to make this list. Now, I'm going to talk about this movie a lot differently than I did Elvis or Skinamarink or Untitled, because unlike those films, this movie had something to say, and I sincerely understand why people clicked with it, and that film is Aftersun. I gave Aftersun 1.5 stars. The consensus is that it's a hit film, and that it's 4.2 out of 5, that it's one of the top 250 long-form feature films of all time. Now, Aftersun deals with a story that I think, as I said, deserves to be told, about a daughter and her father having a good vacation together, but you can tell there's strain on their relationship. The father's divorced from the mother, the daughter's growing up, and there's that natural kid grows up, parent has to let them break off from them a little bit. Those two dynamics are playing out, and there's also the third dynamic of the father's internal pain. But what the film was trying to convey is that the father's struggling deep inside, and some of these flash scenes that place throughout the movie are supposed to explain that the father takes his life not long after the end of this film. If not takes his life, dies in a tragic accident, but it heavily hints that he takes his own life. My problem is that this movie does a lot of hinting, heavily hinting, or leaving stuff open to you in a way that doesn't feel satisfying. Films are open for interpretation, but it feels like Aftersun is not giving you enough to work off of. The main problem that this stems from is these scenes that are interspersed throughout the film of the father in a nightclub, and honestly, I had no idea what was going on in these scenes. Not even in terms of the themes and what it stands for. I just couldn't see what was going on. The strobe light flashes, and you're supposed to see it in pieces, but I had no idea what was going on. For half the film, I thought it was the father and the mother and them pulling apart, and then the father dancing with a man, I thought, and I thought that was hinting that he was gay and was repressed because it was the 90s. But I missed on that. It turns out it's the daughter reaching after the father, and I picked up that it was the daughter about 3/4 into the film, but by that point, I thought she was pushing him away. I thought it was anger, and that they were fighting, and that this was their last great memory. Apparently, I had to look up online, and even the reviewers I read said it took multiple viewings to get this, that it's her reaching out for him in this party, and that she's missing him, longing to create this connection that couldn't evolve. The sad part is that that could make a powerful story, but it's hidden behind these cloudy, hard to interpret scenes that don't do much for me, and worst of all, is hidden behind so much boringness. This film's a slow burn. That's generous. This film's a wick that hasn't been lit. There's so many scenes where it's just her and the dad sitting around. And 1 or 2 times it plays off very cute. For a film that only clocks in at an hour and a half, it felt like a 3-hour film. Honestly, it feels like this should have been a 30-minute short film kind of thing. It felt drawn out, and I don't think it landed the way it was hoping to. Pick Up on South Street. What was Pick Up on South Street? I gave it 1 star, but the consensus is that it's a 3.9 star film, meaning there are 2.9 star ratings between me and the average Letterboxd rating. I'm surprised this film has that high of a rating. It's extremely outdated. It's just a woman bouncing between 2 horrible men and clinging to the one who's on the right side of the law at the end. It's also just boring, not much happens. It's a lot of, yeah, we should check that out. Yeah, like, it's honestly been a while since I've seen it, but I did not want to go back to watch it for this because I have such horrible memories of drudging through this film that I didn't want to touch it again. So I really don't even have much more to say other than this film is insanely overrated. Now, the most overrated film on Letterboxd, in my opinion, the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I gave Rocky Horror 1 star. The critic consensus, the world consensus, I should say, is 4 stars, meaning that there's a ginormous 3-star gap between me and everyone else on Letterboxd. So, what even is the Rocky Horror Picture Show? The parts I can commend it on is its gender-bending, boundary-pushing nature. This came out in the mid-'70s and features a man in drag. That is huge. It talks about them coming from some planet, and it has him hooking up with a man and a woman, and that is awesome. I think that coming out in the middle of the 70s and becoming a cult hit is huge. But it's a horrible film. It's long, half the songs are bad. The one that does slap is Let's Do the Time Warp Again. But they do it about 3 times through the movie. What's the point? There's no narrative behind that other than we're pushing boundaries. It's this Halloween fixture that you always have friends who love watching it in large crowds and saying the lines and messing with the film. And I've tried watching it in that aspect and on my own, and I've hated it both times. I love Tim Curry, and I love Susan Sarandon, so it hates me to say that this film is a slog to get through, and I don't see what people see in it. I get that it's fun to dress up and go to a film, but what are you watching? The film itself is extremely boring. Maybe playing with it with your friends is fun, but you can do that with any film. In fact, the worse a film, the better it is to do it with. For that reason, I think Rocky Horror Picture Show is the most overrated film on Letterboxd. What are your most overrated films in your opinion? What do you disagree with on other people with? I'm going to have a video coming out later this month about the most underrated films on Letterboxd, so we can come at things more positively. But let me know what you think in the comments below.